History often gets tidied up into neat little stories. We love a simple tale of good versus evil, of heroes and villains. The Pazzi Conspiracy of 1478 is usually presented just like that. It's the story of a jealous rival family, the Pazzi, trying to murder the beloved Medici brothers Lorenzo and Giuliano during High Mass in Florence's magnificent cathedral. It's a dramatic, bloody, and ultimately failed assassination plot. But what if I told you that this version of the story, the one we all think we know, is woefully incomplete? What if the real story is far more complex, more ambitious, and tells us so much more about the raw, brutal nature of power? This wasn't just a squabble between two families fighting over who had the grandest palazzo or the most influential friends. The Pazzi Conspiracy was the violent culmination of immense political and financial forces clashing together. It was a geopolitical drama that stretched from the glittering halls of Florentine banking houses all the way to the hallowed corridors of the Vatican in Rome. It was about one of the most powerful men in the world, Pope Sixtus IV, and his relentless ambition to expand his family's influence. The daggers drawn in the Duomo were merely the final desperate act in a much larger and far more significant Game of Thrones. The traditional narrative paints the Pazzi as the sole villains, driven by pure envy of the Medici's unofficial rule over Florence. While envy was certainly a factor, it wasn't the whole picture. This version conveniently leaves out the Medici's own ruthless ambition and their clever, often brutal methods of maintaining control. It also downplays the genuine fears many Florentine citizens had about their republic slowly transforming into a monarchy under Medici dominance. The conspiracy was a symptom of a much deeper disease within the city's political body, a last-ditch effort to restore an old order that was rapidly slipping away. To truly understand what happened on that fateful Easter Sunday, we have to peel back the layers of propaganda written by the winners. We need to look beyond the shocking violence and examine the intricate web of alliances, debts and rivalries that entangled Florence, the papacy, and the other powerful city-states of Italy. The story of the Pazzi Conspiracy isn't just about a failed murder. It's about the death of a republic and the birth of a dynasty. It's a gripping lesson in how power is won, how it is kept, and the fatal mistakes people make when they try to seize it. On the surface, 15th century Florence was a republic. It had a constitution, elected officials, and councils where citizens were meant to debate and decide the city's future. It was a place of immense wealth, artistic genius, and civic pride. But in reality, this republican machinery was a beautifully crafted illusion. Behind the curtain, one family pulled all the strings, the Medici. They weren't kings or dukes. They held few official titles. Instead, their power was built on something far more modern, and in many ways more potent: money. Through their vast international banking network, they controlled the city's finances, which in turn gave them control over its politics. Lorenzo de' Medici, known to history as the Magnificent, was the master of this system. He didn't rule by decree. He ruled through influence, patronage, and a carefully managed network of loyalists. He could ensure his friends and supporters were elected to key government posts. He could use the family bank to grant favorable loans to allies and crush rivals with financial ruin. To the ordinary Florentine, the Medici were the providers of stability, the patrons of breathtaking art, and the guarantors of Florence's prestige. But to the other powerful families, the old aristocracy like the Pazzi, they were upstarts who had subverted the Republic for their own gain. The Pazzi family were everything the Medici were not. They were ancient nobility, with a lineage stretching back through the centuries, whereas the Medici were, in their eyes, new money. The Pazzi were bankers too, but they had been eclipsed by the meteoric rise of their rivals. They watched with growing resentment as the Medici monopolized power, stacking the government with their puppets and subtly rewriting the rules to favor themselves. For families like the Pazzi, this wasn't just about losing business. It was about losing their rightful place in the social and political order. They felt their city, their birthright, was being stolen from them. This rivalry festered in the heart of Florence. It was a city living a double life. In public, there were grand ceremonies, festivals, and a performance of civic unity, often orchestrated by Lorenzo himself. But in private, behind the stone walls of the great palazzi, the air was thick with suspicion and whispered plots. The political structure was incredibly fragile, dependent on the goodwill and financial might of a single family. Everyone knew that the Medici's power, while immense, was unofficial, and if it was unofficial, it could, in theory, be challenged. All it would take was one decisive, shocking blow to bring the whole system crashing down. The plot to topple the Medici wasn't born in Florence alone. Its most powerful and influential backer was hundreds of miles away, sitting on the throne of St. Peter in Rome. Pope Sixtus IV was not a man to be trifled with. Born Francesco della Rovere, he was driven by a fierce determination to advance his family's interests and expand the power of the Papal States, the territories in central Italy that he ruled directly as a secular prince. He saw the independent and powerful city of Florence under the firm control of the Medici as a major obstacle to his grand ambitions for a Rovere dynasty. The conflict began, as so many do, over money and territory. The Pope needed vast sums to fund his military campaigns and lavishly promote his nephews. Traditionally, the papal accounts had been handled by the Medici Bank, a hugely prestigious and profitable arrangement. But the relationship between Lorenzo and Sixtus soured. Lorenzo was wary of the Pope's expansionist plans, which threatened the delicate balance of power in Italy. When the Pope sought a massive loan to purchase the town of Imola for his favorite nephew, Girolamo Riario, Lorenzo refused. He rightly feared that a papal stronghold so close to Florentine territory would be a constant threat. This refusal was a declaration of economic war. Furious, Pope Sixtus IV took a step that sent shockwaves through the financial world. He stripped the Medici Bank of its status as the papal bank. He then handed this incredibly lucrative contract to their biggest rivals, the Pazzi Bank. For the Pazzi, this was a massive coup. It not only brought them immense wealth and prestige, but also made them the firm allies of the most powerful man in Italy. Suddenly, their local rivalry with the Medici was elevated into a grand international struggle, with the Pope himself cheering from the sidelines. With the Pope's backing, the plan escalated from financial competition to violent conspiracy. The Pope's nephew, Girolamo Riario, was a key driver of the plot, along with Francesco Salviati, a man whom the Pope had made Archbishop of Pisa against Lorenzo's wishes. The Pope gave his tacit blessing, making it clear he wanted a change of government in Florence, but stopping just short of explicitly ordering murder. He provided mercenaries, led by a captain named Giovan Battista da Montesecco, to support the coup once the Medici were eliminated. The conspiracy now had a banker for funding, an archbishop for legitimacy, and a pope for divine and military backing. The transfer of the papal accounts was the tipping point, the moment when a cold war of finance and influence turned hot. For Lorenzo de' Medici, losing this prestigious contract was more than a financial blow. It was a public humiliation. It signaled to the world that his family's once unshakable grip on power might be loosening. The Medici Bank's power was built on its reputation as the most reliable and well-connected financial institution in Europe. Being fired by the Pope, their most important client, damaged that reputation severely. It was a sign of weakness, and in the cutthroat world of Renaissance Italy, weakness was a fatal vulnerability. For the Pazzi family, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With the Pope's money flowing into their coffers, they were emboldened. Francesco de' Pazzi, the head of their bank in Rome, became the conspiracy's most enthusiastic cheerleader. He saw a chance, not just to restore his family's honor, but to seize total control of Florence. The alliance with the Pope gave them what they had always lacked: a powerful external ally who could provide military muscle and political cover. They were no longer just a disgruntled Florentine family. They were agents of a papal-backed regime change, a far more formidable proposition. The conflict escalated further through a series of provocations. Lorenzo, never one to take a slight lying down, used his political machine in Florence to strike back. When a valuable inheritance came into dispute, which by law should have gone to the Pazzi family through marriage, Lorenzo had the laws of Florence retrospectively changed to deny them the money. It was a spiteful, arrogant, and deeply personal attack. He was using the state as his personal weapon to punish his rivals. This act of public humiliation pushed the Pazzi past the point of no return. It convinced them that there was no living with the Medici. One of them had to go. This intricate dance of finance and politics highlights how deeply intertwined these forces were. Power wasn't just about armies and castles. It was about credit, debt, and economic leverage. Lorenzo's refusal of the loan to the Pope was a strategic move in a much larger game, but it had unforeseen consequences. It created a powerful new alliance between his enemies and set in motion a chain of events that would lead directly to bloodshed. The shifting banking alliances were not the backdrop to the story. They were the engine driving the plot forward, turning a family feud into a full-blown international crisis. The plan was as audacious as it was sacrilegious. The conspirators decided that the perfect moment to strike would be on Sunday, April 26, 1478, during High Mass at Florence's Cathedral, the Santa Maria del Fiore. The Medici brothers, Lorenzo and Giuliano, would both be in attendance, relatively unguarded in the house of God. The signal for the attack was to be the elevation of the host, the most sacred moment in the Catholic liturgy. As the bell rang to signify that the wafer had been transformed into the body of Christ, the assassins would strike. The symbolism was chilling. They would use the holiest of moments to commit the deadliest of sins. The choice of venue, however, proved to be a critical problem. The plan originally relied on a seasoned mercenary captain, Giovan Battista da Montesecco, to assassinate Lorenzo. But when Montesecco learned that the killing was to take place inside a church, his conscience got the better of him. He was a professional soldier, a man paid to kill, but he refused to commit murder on consecrated ground, seeing it as an unforgivable act of sacrilege. His last-minute withdrawal forced the conspirators into a desperate change of plan. They had to find replacements, and the men they chose were far from ideal. The task of killing Lorenzo fell to two priests, Antonio Maffei and Stefano da Bagnone. The Pazzi conspirators reasoned that because they were men of the cloth, they would have easier access to the brothers, and their presence would arouse less suspicion. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. These priests were academics and courtiers, not trained killers. They had the will to commit murder, but they lacked the skill and the nerve. Meanwhile, the job of killing Giuliano was assigned to the more capable hands of Francesco de' Pazzi himself, and another professional assassin, Bernardo Baroncelli. They were determined to see their part of the mission through. As the service began, the atmosphere inside the packed cathedral was thick with tension. The conspirators were in place, daggers hidden beneath their cloaks. Lorenzo and Giuliano were separated in the crowd. When the fateful bell finally rang, the assassins lunged. Baroncelli and Francesco de' Pazzi descended on Giuliano with savage fury, stabbing him again and again. He fell to the marble floor in a pool of blood, dying almost instantly from 19 brutal wounds. But the attack on Lorenzo was a clumsy failure. The two priests, fumbling and hesitant, only managed to inflict a minor wound on his neck. Lorenzo, a strong and athletic man, drew his own sword, wrapped his cloak around his arm as a shield, and fought his way to the sacristy, where his friends barricaded him inside. The plot had half failed, and in a conspiracy, half failure is total defeat. While chaos erupted inside the cathedral, the second part of the coup was already in motion. The other key conspirator, Archbishop Salviati, had gone to the Palazzo della Signoria, Florence's town hall, with a group of his own armed men. His plan was to seize the seat of government and announce to the city that the tyrants were dead and the Republic was restored. But his nervous demeanor and the heavily armed retinue that accompanied him immediately aroused the suspicion of the Gonfaloniere, the head of the city government, who was a staunch Medici loyalist. Salviati was playing the part of a liberator, but honestly, he looked like a guilty man. The Gonfaloniere, sensing a trap, had the massive doors of the palazzo barred shut, trapping some of Salviati's men and separating them from their leader. When the archbishop tried to take control, he found himself a prisoner. At the same time, the great alarm bell of the palazzo, known as the Vacca, began to toll, its deep, resonant clang echoing across the city. This was the pre-arranged signal for the citizens of Florence to rally in defense of the Republic. But the conspirators had made a fatal error in judgment. They believed the people would rally to their cause. Instead, the bell summoned a furious mob loyal to the Medici. Down in the streets, the news spread like wildfire. But the story that took hold wasn't one of liberation. It was one of sacrilegious murder and a treacherous attack on the city's beloved leaders. Cries of "Palle, Palle," the rallying cry of the Medici, referring to the balls on their family crest, filled the air. Far from welcoming the Pazzi as saviors, the Florentine people turned on them with ferocious rage. Mobs formed, armed with makeshift weapons, and began hunting down anyone associated with the conspiracy. The public's reaction was not the one the Pazzi had so confidently predicted. The justice that followed was swift, brutal, and entirely extrajudicial. Archbishop Salviati and his associates were unceremoniously hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, their bodies left dangling as a gruesome warning to all who would dare challenge Medici power. Francesco de' Pazzi was dragged from his hiding place, naked and bleeding, and met the same fate. Within hours, the streets of Florence were a stage for a horrific spectacle of revenge. The failed coup had unleashed the very chaos it was meant to prevent, but that chaos was directed not at the Medici system, but at its enemies. The failure of the Pazzi conspiracy did not restore the Florentine Republic, it effectively destroyed it. In the aftermath of the violence, Lorenzo de' Medici emerged not weakened, but stronger than ever before. He had survived an assassination attempt, and his beloved brother had been martyred. He was no longer just the city's unofficial leader. He was a living symbol of Florence's survival, a hero who had faced down treacherous enemies in the very heart of the city. The wave of public sympathy and outrage that followed the attack gave him the political capital to do what his family had previously only done in secret. In the days and weeks that followed, a brutal purge was carried out. Anyone with a connection to the Pazzi or the other conspirators was hunted down, executed, or exiled. The Pazzi family name was erased from the city. Their property was confiscated, their coat of arms was ordered to be destroyed, and a decree was passed forbidding any Pazzi female from marrying. It was a systematic annihilation of a rival dynasty. Lorenzo was no longer content to simply manage the Republic from behind the scenes. He now began to dismantle its structures openly, creating a new council of his most loyal supporters that effectively bypassed the city's traditional government. The conspiracy also triggered a full-blown war. Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the execution of an archbishop and the complete failure of his plan, excommunicated Lorenzo and placed the entire city of Florence under an interdict which banned all religious services. He then formed a military alliance with the Kingdom of Naples and declared war on Florence. For 2 years, papal and Neapolitan armies ravaged Florentine territory. This external threat, however, only served to rally the Florentine people even more tightly around Lorenzo. He was their wartime leader, defending them not only from enemy soldiers, but from the wrath of the Pope himself. Lorenzo's finest hour came when he undertook a daring diplomatic mission, traveling by sea to Naples to negotiate directly with his enemy, King Ferrante. He risked capture and death, but his gamble paid off. He successfully persuaded the king to abandon his alliance with the Pope and make a separate peace with Florence. When he returned to the city, he was greeted as a savior, the man who had brought peace and preserved Florence's independence. The last vestiges of republican opposition melted away. The government was now his to command, and Florence had taken a decisive step from a republic in name to a principality in all but name. The ultimate failure of the Pazzi conspiracy hinged on one colossal miscalculation. The conspirators fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power and public opinion in Medici Florence. They believed that power rested solely in the person of the leader. Their plan was simple and direct. Remove Lorenzo and Giuliano, and the Medici system would collapse like a house of cards. They assumed that the Florentine people, yearning for the liberty of the old republic, would rise up and thank them for it. They couldn't have been more wrong. What the Pazzi failed to grasp was that Medici power was not just personal, it was systemic. It was woven into the very fabric of the city. For decades, the Medici had cultivated a vast network of patronage that extended deep into Florentine society. They provided jobs for artisans, commissions for artists, loans for merchants, and charity for the poor. Thousands of people depended on the stability of the Medici Bank and the generosity of the Medici family for their livelihoods. They were not just rulers, they were the city's primary employers and social safety net. An attack on the Medici was an attack on the prosperity and security of the entire city. Moreover, the Pazzi and their allies completely misread the public mood. While the old aristocratic families may have resented Medici dominance, the common people largely saw them as benevolent leaders. Lorenzo, in particular, was a master of public relations. He sponsored lavish public festivals, tournaments, and carnivals that kept the populace entertained and fostered a sense of civic pride that was inextricably linked with his family's name. When the conspirators shouted "Libertà," that is, liberty, in the streets after the attack, the people heard it not as a promise of freedom, but as a threat of chaos and a return to the factional violence that had plagued Florence before the Medici brought stability. The Pazzi offered the abstract ideal of republican liberty, but the Medici offered something far more tangible: peace, stability, and prosperity. The people of Florence chose bread and circuses over a political ideal they barely remembered. The conspirators thought they were killing a tyrant, but the public saw them as murdering a patron. This is the crucial lesson of their failure. They believed that power was a position to be seized, when in reality, Lorenzo's power was a relationship he had carefully built with the city and its people over many years. They tried to win with daggers what could only be won with loyalty. The story of the Pazzi conspiracy is far more than a dramatic episode from Renaissance Italy. It stands as a timeless and powerful lesson about the nature of power, the fragility of political systems, and the consequences of miscalculation. One of the clearest lessons is that simply removing an individual leader, or even a group of leaders, is rarely enough to change a deeply entrenched system. The Pazzi thought that by killing the Medici brothers, they could decapitate the regime, but they failed to realize that the regime was not just a head. It was a body with 1,000 arms, a network of dependency and loyalty that they could not hope to sever with a few dagger thrusts. This historical event offers a stark warning about the difference between official and actual power. Florence was, on paper, a republic with democratic institutions. In reality, it was an oligarchy controlled by a single family through economic leverage and popular support. The conspirators made the mistake of attacking the men, not the source of their power. This is a pattern we see repeated throughout history. Coup and revolutions often fail when the new leaders don't understand that true power doesn't always reside in the formal seats of government, but in the economic, social, and cultural systems that underpin society. The aftermath of the conspiracy also shows how a crisis can be exploited to consolidate power. The attack, which was meant to destroy Lorenzo, ended up making him invincible. He masterfully used the threat to his life and the martyrdom of his brother to justify a crackdown on all opposition and formalize his control over the state. He transformed a moment of vulnerability into an opportunity for absolute authority. This is a classic political maneuver. A leader, faced with an external or internal threat, rallies the people around them and uses the emergency to sweep away political restraints. The Republic died not when the Pazzi drew their daggers, but when the Florentines handed Lorenzo the power to avenge the attack. Ultimately, the Pazzi Conspiracy teaches us that history is not just a series of events, but a study in human psychology and political dynamics. It shows how ambition, envy, and pride can lead to fatal errors in judgment. It demonstrates that popular support is a formidable weapon, more powerful than any army or assassin's blade. The story matters today because the same forces are still at play in our own world. The struggle between established power and ambitious challengers, the interplay of finance and politics, and the manipulation of public opinion are as relevant in the 21st century as they were in 15th century Florence. History does not repeat itself exactly, but its lessons, like the echoes in Florence's halls of power, never truly fade away.